What if you had instant analytics on your PDP images and a faster way to create content that performs better? That's what we're diving into in today's episode, how top brands and retailers are using analytics and automation to stay ahead across retail media and the digital shelf. It's Rapid helps teams scale smarter. They analyze image performance, they help you create optimized assets for retail media networks and the digital shelf, and they integrate directly with PIM and DAM systems for seamless execution. Brands like Pepsi, Mondelez, and Instacart use its Rapid to go beyond basic tools to uncover gaps in PDP and retail media performance by analyzing the images themselves, not just the count. Streamline banner creation across hundreds of formats for Amazon Ads, Walmart Connect, and other retail and social platforms, and launch high-performing content more than 80% faster across e-commerce and marketing channels. If you're buried in manual work or struggling to keep up, this episode and It's Rapid will show you a better way. Visit itsrapid.ai to learn more.
Welcome to Beyond the Shelf with Dave Feinlieb. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. We publish new episodes every Tuesday morning, so be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And now, here's your host, Dave Feinlieb.
Welcome back to Beyond the Shelf. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Take us back, if you would. How'd you get your start in the space?
Oh, boy. I'd love to say it was super intentional, but way back in the early 90s, I had been working for a CPG company, and for various reasons, I left there and was living in Chicago. And I was just looking really to get closer to operations. I've been a strategy guy pretty much exclusively up until that point, and I wanted to stay in Chicago because my wife wasn't moving. And I got called by a headhunter for this kind of new ventures almost division of Sears Roebuck and Company. And the promise was that I could get to work on some interesting strategic projects, but eventually move into an operating role. And that was attractive to me. So I gave it a try. And then here I am all these years later, still in retail. Sears not around anymore, really, but I'm still around.
I love it.
I outlasted them.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to talk to you. I got to ask you this. So sometimes I interview folks who want to go from operations to strategy, and sometimes I interview folks and they want to go from strategy to operations. What was the draw for you on being more operational?
I had a little bit of entrepreneurial experience earlier during my college days, actually, a pretty small business, but I whether this is good or bad, I liked being in charge. I loved creating new things and having accountability, I guess, for real measures as opposed to just projects. So, I mean, I've been back and forth over the years in those roles, but that was the appeal. But it was probably just more like, oh, if you go to business school, you're supposed to be a CEO one day or whatever. And like, in order to be a CEO, I had to do a bunch of jobs in between. It didn't seem like anybody was going to make me a CEO right away. So.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, this is great. So you got your start there, VP of multi-channel integration at Sears.
Mm-hmm.
You were thinking about multi-channel before it was probably even a thing. Tell us about that and sort of the problem set you were going after.
Yeah, so my first few years at Sears, I had a bunch of different jobs, and I was running a division. And we had, and I'd been promoted to VP general manager, so I was on part of the leadership. The big leadership team was about 180 of us or something. And we would have an annual strategy retreat. And in, I think, January or February of 1999, our CEO at the time, Arthur Martinez, got up there and he said something like, the future of our company will be determined by our ability to meet consumers' needs anytime, anywhere, anyway. And that was really a result. I mean, these are early days of e-commerce. As much as Sears obviously got a lot of things wrong over the years. Sears was a very early mover in establishing Sears.com.
Right.
First few years of the internet, I love to say our sales were considerably bigger than Amazon's. And because there was a catalog background and there was kind of this direct marketing orientation, it was pretty easy for Sears to see the promise of e-commerce, even in the early days. But the other thing that was, I think, very apparent to Arthur and a few of us was that, we're one brand. And yes, there are aspects of e-commerce that are very separate. But at a certain point, customers are buying from a brand and they're going to choose how to do that. And we needed to figure out, particularly because we were very, very siloed, because one of the other mantras that came out of that was our VP of marketing, Bob Thacker, saying silos belong on farms. If we can't break down the silos, we cannot have a cohesive customer experience. So anyway, there was just a lot of very forward thinking that some folks had done, not me, especially at that time. And we decided out of that to form an enterprise-wide initiative to figure out how to create what I now call a more harmonized experience, multi-channel, omni-channel, frictionless, seamless, whatever. And so, I got pulled out of my division general manager position to be the VP of multi-channel integration. And basically, we were trying to figure out how we were going to bring all this disparate data together. That was one of the big points. What sort of technology platforms did we need to build out this vision? So I sometimes say I was the world's first omni-channel executive. I don't know if that was literally true, but I got a really early start on that. And then after I left Sears and I came down where I am now in Dallas to join the Neiman Marcus group, I had other responsibilities, but I was able to leverage a lot of that, some of the challenges of breaking down those silos and really being more customer centric as opposed to channel centric.
Steve, I want to ask you about this idea of silos and organizations. Today, we see that in areas like physical retail, digital with the digital shelf, retail media. So those are all surfaces that require different kinds of product initiatives, marketing initiatives, and all of that. Yet they're still really hard to put together and put a kind of a cohesive strategy and execution together. Any learnings from the work you've done that maybe could apply there?
Well, I do think, I'm often very, in my writing and speaking about it, sometimes I'm a little too glib about it because I think, it really irritates me. It's not exactly on your question, but when people talk about, we're incredibly customer centric, and I'm like, well, you obviously aren't customer centric because you're organized in a very non-customer centric way because customers don't care about channels, right? Right? They just don't. And I think that was very obvious even when we got started at the work at Sears, but that was a long time ago now. I've been beating this drum about breaking down silos for decades now. So, but I think it is complicated. Some of it is the culture. If you've been a physically dominant retailer historically, and physical stores are kind of the center of the universe, then that is a hard thing to change. If you've built out your technical architecture, your metrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's so embedded that it is not trivial, like just technology-wise or measurement-wise or what have you, but also just the orientation of people. And of course, so many companies, this is the great undoing, I often say, and it's one of the reasons why some of the newer brands, like a Warby Parker, are better at it, is they started from the standpoint of, well, we're one brand in multiple channels, and so we're just going to build it that way from the beginning. And we're not going to pay people different incentives based upon whether we don't care whether you shop in the store or online, right? So a lot of them started from that standpoint. So they built the culture that way, and they built the technology to support it and the measurements to support it. If you've been in the other direction, you often have to undo things. So, like for example, in both Sears and Neiman Marcus, we had separate measurements for the different channels. We treated e-commerce as if it was our biggest store. People used to say that all the time. E-commerce is our biggest store. And so it is inherently complicated. So I think not the only, but the primary way is if the CEO does not embrace it and he or she talk about that is our mission and we are going to get there, and I'm willing to make calls to be a tiebreaker on these kinds of things. If you're not I mean, I'm not a big fan of top-down management per se, but if you look at, for example, the big changes at Walmart over the last 5 or 6 years, it is because Doug McMillon said, this is the way we're going to do it. I'm in charge. It's going to happen. We're going to distort our resources there. And when push comes to shove, we're going to vote in favor of the customer, not the channel, not the product category. So from a leadership perspective, it's so hard that you have to be relentless and you have to accept it's a multi-year journey. It's going to be expensive. You're going to break a lot of eggs along the way. But they're real. I mean, part of the reason why even people that have embraced this philosophy, part of the reason why it hasn't happened very quickly is it's often very expensive and you have a lot of forces that are trying to keep the silos in place out of selfish interest, or that's how you get ahead of this company, is to do X, Y, and Z.
Great insights. I love the Warby Parker example. That's a great way to think about it. You've got yourself a podcast, Remarkable Retail. Tell us about that. And then I want to talk about some of the books you've written.
Sure. Well, Remarkable Retail. So it was to make it a little bit about my book. My first book was called Remarkable Retail, and the podcast was a COVID project, really. Or my partner, I do it with Mike LeBlanc. He's from Canada, so it's a COVID project, not project. We always get into the pronunciation thing. But really, I had kind of sort of thought about doing a podcast, but I didn't really know how to do it, and so I didn't really put any effort to it. And Mike asked me if I'd ever thought about it, and I was like, well, I have, but technology-wise, I don't know what, seems hard. And he said, well, what if I did the production? And so we were like, well, let's give it a shot. And so 5+ years ago, we stood up this podcast, and now we're about close to 300 episodes in. And it really initially was to kind of unpack some of the lessons from the book. It was a little bit more editorially tied to that. Then over time, it's evolved to be more about primarily showcasing remarkable brands and really what are the leadership and growth stories behind them. We mostly have CEOs and founders on, occasionally, talking heads like you and me, coming on.
Yeah, right.
And it's been really fun. I've learned a lot from it and met some really, really great people, and it's grown really nicely. So I've been excited to keep going for a little while anyway.
Congratulations on it. I know from firsthand experience how hard it is to maintain the cadence and keep doing it. And then you do get those breakthrough moments where you look back and you go, oh, we really built this thing. So yeah, kudos to you.
Thank you.
Leader's Leap is one of several books you've written. Tell us about that one. What's the core idea, and kind of maybe bring it to life for us today?
It's kind of a reflection of some of the things we were touching on here. There's a little bit of some of what I didn't get to in Remarkable Retail, because Remarkable Retail is really more a playbook to stand out in an industry undergoing a lot of disruption. But so it's a little bit more of essential kind of operating principles almost. The part that I didn't really get to is some of what you've asked about, which is why don't companies make the changes they need to make to succeed? And as time has gone on, as I've worked as a consultant and doing speaking and writing and all these kinds of things, one of the things that just kind of kept hitting me, even though I don't exactly say it in the book, is if the world has changed so much, because I don't think you could talk to anybody, at least in retail, that doesn't say, wow, retail today is just so different than it was. I mean, obviously 25 years ago before e-commerce was a thing, but even just in the last few years, smart devices, cloud computing, and now AI, right? It's just being disrupted so much. So I kept saying, if the world has changed so much, why have so many changed so little? And I really want to try to understand that. And I don't think and the book is really, it's a strategy book in a way, but to me, it's on, I don't know if this will land with all your audience members, but I'm sure some are familiar with Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, and, which is a lot about why strong companies don't transform for a new era. But he wrote that really in a physical world. So part of me was like, can I write an innovator's dilemma for a digital world? Because obviously things are moving much more quickly and in really unexpected ways often. But at the same time, I didn't want to make it just kind of an academic theory, strategy, philosophy book. I wanted to get to, why is it that individual leaders don't make the changes? Because it's one thing, there's plenty of examples. I can tell you this was true at Sears. We knew what we needed to do differently. I'm not saying perfectly, but when people say, well, didn't you realize like Home Depot was eating your lunch? Like, of course we did. Like, it was not, but it's the knowing doing gap, right? So I wanted to understand, yes, there are things that people miss in strategy development or underappreciate. But from a leadership perspective, why don't you make those leaps? So what I try to do is balance some more courageous leadership principles, almost, if people are familiar with Brene Brown's work, like almost bringing that in, and at the same time kind of updating a lot of the great ideas that Clayton Christensen had in Innovator's Dilemma.
This episode of Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Mondelez, Instacart, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai.
So vulnerability, you're thinking about
Exactly.
being authentic, I suppose, and true to the message.
Yeah, one thing I get asked a lot, because I can definitely point to places I've worked in, as I said earlier, and some clients where there definitely are mistakes of strategy or an underappreciation for how things are changing, and almost like denial, breaking through denial. But the beginning of some of the things I recommend is really about, and I almost call us like the three horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to leadership mistakes, which is how ego, ignorance, and fear often have this really unfortunate combination. So just generally, I give some specific examples of this, and there are different circumstances for sure. But I think a lot of times what I've seen is leaders will get to this perspective of, I'm going to just keep doing what got me here, what made me successful. And what I've seen time and time again is not only is what made you successful the past 20 years probably not helping you, when you think that it is, it actually gets in the way of you shifting your perspectives. And I'm sure we can all think of examples of where great brands have held on to strategies way past their expiration date. So I think that's an ego issue. Like, I alone can fix this. I know how to do this, and not necessarily opening the aperture or being able to rethink preconceived notions. Actually, I would recommend Adam Grant's book on his work on this, because he does a much deeper dive on it. The ignorance part, and I know that sometimes it's a charged word, but I think we have to open the aperture, because, retail, and I'm sure other industries, they were pretty simple 30 years ago. Like, you didn't, and when we talk, people would talk about best practices and all that kind of stuff, and competitive analysis, SWOT analysis. Almost all of that was done in a very narrow lane. If you're in the appliance business, you looked at appliance competitors. Well, today, or for years now, competition comes from unexpected places a lot of times. People have completely reinvented ways of doing things. The most obvious one is, the Netflix versus Blockbuster. Like, that's a really easy one to understand, right? It's just a totally different way of delivering the end problem. So if you're not opening the aperture, if you're not open to other possibilities, if you're not talking to people that are seeing things in a really different way, then you just don't have enough information to be able to do the work that you have to do. So that's kind of what I mean by ignorance. But I think the biggest one often is fear. And one of the things I say in the book, which is not my own idea, is that safe is risky. More and more, when you see the safe strategies that so many companies have adopted, and this is part of the reason why I call it leaders leap, it's like this, it's so much incremental thinking. If you're in the department store industry, which I spent a lot of years in and have consulted in, nobody needs a better 3-story place to buy a lot of random stuff in a big regional mall. Like the world, that industry has shrunk by 90%. And pretty much everybody in that industry has done, to be a little inflammatory about it, nothing of any meaningful consequence that entire time. But they have been working on trying to create a better version of something that is increasingly irrelevant. So it's cool, as I often say, to be the best blacksmith in town. But it turns out being a blacksmith is not a particularly good vocation. And there's so much incremental thinking. So I think, but it's often the fear that keeps, again, I'm going to give people credit. I'm not going to pick on any individual leaders, but it's not hard to think of a lot of companies that have, Sears being one, but others that don't exist anymore because they didn't change or are just much damaged versions of themselves. Right? I'm willing to believe that those leaders all had an idea of what they could do differently, and sometimes it's their investor group, and there's other reasons. But a lot of times they just weren't willing to go out on a limb and try some different things. And I'll use two quick examples, if I could, of companies that I think are great studies.
Sure. Yeah.
One is, the more extreme one is Restoration Hardware, the company formerly known as Restoration Hardware. If people know them, 20 years ago, they were these weird little stores it was a catalog business of a bunch of miscellaneous hardware stuff mostly. And then they started having gift items, and it was just like a weird mix of stuff. And they were, I think they actually filed for bankruptcy, but anyway, they were struggling. Gary Friedman came in from Williams-Sonoma, and he started to add more stuff that were home related kind of out of his thing. And it started to shift a little bit. But the big breakthrough for them, and I actually heard him pitch this before they opened one, and I thought it was insane, were to build these RH gallery stores, which are 10 times the size, if not more, of their core format. Restaurants, pools, if you haven't been to one, there's these spectacular temple of high-end modern furnishings. It was a huge leap, and it was kind of crazy. But the company is now quite successful. I mean, they're going through the little home cycle stuff that a lot of people in the home industry are. But it is now, they've migrated almost 100% from the old version. But it was a big step forward. But they were clearly on the road to irrelevance, and they made that change. One that's not quite as extreme is Dick's Sporting Goods. They have built a similar but much bigger and quite different version of their core superstore format called House of Sport. And they have been building these out. So the mix is changing over time. So that's not, as extreme. But the analogy I try to have is, if you're living on a planet that is growing, just to kind of be a little bit more metaphorical about it, but if you're living on a planet that is, not going to sustain life over the long term, then you need your escape rocket to move to Earth too. And when your business model is dying, if you never even tried to build this alternate planet to move to, eventually you're going to die. So
you know what the answer is on this path. At least try the other path.
Well, this is a little bit why, though, you have to break through the denial, right? Like, I think it's easy to convince yourself that surely I can make it a little bit better, and I will be fine.
Oh, I see.
So
yeah.
I will say, to be fair, like, it's not always, things change so quickly today that it's a little harder oftentimes to work out how to respond, because you're stuck with your legacy assets, and maybe you're a publicly traded company. You got to know. So there are real constraints. But I think if you can see, which was blindingly obvious 25 years ago, that department stores weren't going to be like that. You didn't have to have any great insight to see that. And every year it got worse. So, but never to build this other thing, to think somehow incrementally you were going to get to a sustainable place. To me, it's obvious now today that that's insane. But I've been saying this for 20 years, so people can go back and find me saying this. I haven't changed my view at all. Even when people say you're being way too negative, I'm like, oh, maybe I've been wrong before, for sure. So anyway, but I think you have to. It's a long way of saying that if you are doing the work, if you are willing to think more boldly about possibilities, you're not getting up one morning and saying we're bailing on this thing and we got this. All our eggs are in one basket. use a ton of cliches there.
Right.
But if you're not building this set of possibilities and experimenting and seeing, you always have a chance to either say that didn't work, bail on it or pivot on it, or wow, this is actually working pretty well. We're going to distort our resources. But if you don't even start doing that, you don't have that culture of experimentation, you're not open to the possibility that your business model is being made irrelevant or could be made irrelevant, then you're not doing transformational work. You're not really leading for a new era. And one of the main points I try to make in Leaders Leap is what it takes to be truly remarkable in a world where customers have incredible choice and very little friction moving back and forth. That only puts a higher premium on you delivering incredible customer value. You kind of get away with being a little bit better than average years ago because there was a lot of friction. Not everybody had all these choices. Well, now most people have almost infinite choices if they can afford it. And then at the second time, the rate of change is much more exponential. So to the extent that you had a gap 20 years ago, you had a little bit more time and energy, and maybe you could kind of get away with incremental. Today, there's no place to hide. And if you fall behind, you can fall so far behind so quickly that there's no chance that you can. So the kind of call to action there is like, let's just get honest about the world we live in. And for many companies, not all, I don't think my dry cleaner is going to be made irrelevant by AI or maybe robotics. I don't know. But, some industries are much more insulated, but most of us don't work in industries where you can at least see how significant and how rapid the pace of change. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk. That was a long-winded answer.
No, that's fantastic. Such great insights. I love the real world examples, first of all. And then I think this point you're making about the speed of change right now in this market is incredible. That does get me to our topic around AI and your consulting that you're doing,
Yeah.
Sageberry Consulting.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little about the kind of work you do today, and then what are you hearing in the market with clients that you work with?
Yeah, I'm focused mostly on, I would say, overall corporate growth strategy for the most part, or some domain knowledge. So I've worked with some very large retailers like Walmart and Nike. I've worked with smaller retailers, worked with technology firms. So it's really kind of across the retail ecosystem and trying to respond to some of these trends. AI is obviously a great example of the speed of disruption. I always joke around, 3 years ago, I would go to conferences and it was all about the metaverse. And 2 years ago, it was all about retail media networks. And now it's all things, not just AI, but agentic AI, which I think you could take a random sample of people in retail 18 months ago and say, what's agentic AI? And most people would not have any idea what you're talking about. So I think it's pretty obvious. And, we can have different perspectives as to how big and how fast the disruption will occur. But I think it's pretty obvious that it's massive and happening quickly. What most of the companies are the leaders that I talk to. I'm on the board of a retailer. We have a meeting next week, and we're going to be talking. It's one of the things we're going to be talking about. I would say, people can see more clearly the automation of kind of rote tasks, that kind of efficiency piece pretty clearly, whether that's supply chain or marketing. I mean, it's across, you would know way better than I do, across lots of different pieces of the puzzle. I think people are still trying to really get their head around. I mean, for example, I think if you're a multi-line retailer, the potential to be disintermediated through a shopping agent, I think people are starting to really worry about that and how to respond to that. But lots of questions about which companies, which models are going to reign supreme. New business models like Daydream and other. There's lots of startups going after it. So I think it's a very noisy space. So I think there's a lot of aptitude or interest in learning and trying to think through what this could all mean. A little harder maybe to paint a clear picture as to what the world might look like to the extent the dust settles. I don't know if the dust ever settles anymore, but presumably the way will become more clear within a year or two. But so I think it's there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of fear, There's a lot of confusion. I definitely see some companies that I don't think are spending enough time. I'm like, you don't have to have the answer to it or start spending millions and millions of dollars necessarily. But if you aren't thinking about it and doing some scenario planning, I would advise you to, you know. But I think people have been burned a little bit by some other. I think this is different, but there was a lot of metaverse activity. There was a lot of voice commerce activity. There have been the flavors of the month or year or whatever, where people are like,
and they want to make sure this isn't one of those before they.
So I do think it is fundamentally different. So I try to say, like, I get that you've been burned on this, and perhaps you should be a little bit skeptical. But I think there are clearly some really fundamental differences between some past technology waves that were maybe a little bit more bright, shiny objects than. I mean, I worked on Second Life and MySpace social media strategies back in the day. So it's like, or Clubhouse. I mean, there have been these things that are like, oh God, this is revolutionizing retail, and it turns out not so much, right? But I think this is much more like cloud computing and the internet, I think, than it is, whether you're going to be shopping on some Amazon device or Echo or something like that.
Well, Steve, this has been a great conversation. We've got the rapid rundown for you, a couple of fast-paced questions.
Yeah.
Your quick thoughts. First off, one tool, habit, or practice you rely on that makes you more effective.
Well, the one I would say, I don't do this as consistently as I should, but meditation is something that's been really helpful to me. It slows me down a little bit, which I often need. And it kind of gets me sometimes can help me get out of my patterns of thinking, because I have as much confirmation bias or filtering or whatever as I think probably anybody does. So that tends, it's one of these things, like I know my habits to avoid. Meditation, I think, when I do it consistently, helps me be more aware and hopefully reframe my thinking a little bit.
Absolutely. A retail trend you think is overhyped?
I have to put a caveat or a nuance on this. I think big picture retail media networks are overhyped. But what I mean by that really is overhyped for everybody that's not named Amazon, Walmart, Kroger, and as a short list. I mean, I think the concentration of success and momentum there is extreme. And so I'm not saying it's not something that many retailers shouldn't pursue, but I think it's been put out there as this like enormous profit unlock. And it absolutely, like, you just will look at Amazon's most recent results and I'm sure what Walmart will report, and it's an enormous profit driver. But I don't think it has nearly the appeal for a lot of other retailers that some people think, or at least not in its current construction.
Yeah, great insight. Your dream podcast guest?
I think I would say Doug McMillon, the outgoing, well, now I guess he's officially out.
Oh yeah,
CEO of Walmart. Right. And I say that, Walmart. We've had the CEO of Sam's Club, the head of Walmart International on the podcast, so we've done okay getting senior Walmart executives. But
yeah, you've got some great guests.
Thank you. And I worked with Walmart a little bit on their omnichannel strategy. I never got a chance to meet Doug. I think it is so impressive for such a large company with a very entrenched culture, the things that they have been able to do in the last 4 or 5 years in particular is extraordinary. And when you think about how huge their base is, for them to grow at an above average rate is extraordinary. And everybody that I have worked with at Walmart just say amazing things about what a phenomenal leader he is. So I've gotten that, very much secondhand. But now, particularly since he's left, I think that, the ability to not be in the chair and reflect back on what that leadership journey has been, both leadership and strategy. So who knows? Maybe if he's not out fishing,
we'll look for him.
We'll see.
We will look for him on your pod. That'd be incredible. At the end of a busy week, how do you like to unwind?
Well, I've got, unfortunately or fortunately, I got in the habit of, we record a lot of our podcast stuff on Friday, so I don't feel that's not very relaxing. for me. Usually, I go for a run. Usually, just get some physical exercise. I'm not a super serious runner, but particularly if the weather is nice, get outside, get out into nature as best I can in a fairly big city. So,
Steve, this has been such a pleasure. You've got some great books out there. You've got a podcast. You've got Sageberry Consulting. You have a lot going on. Thanks for spending some time with us here at Beyond the Shelf. If our listeners want to find you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
well, probably LinkedIn's probably the best place. So, or just Google Steve Dennis Retail. I do pretty well. I guess my SEO strategy was working okay. So, yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I love to engage with people and mix it up on some of these ideas. It really helps. Selfishly, it's fun and it helps me tighten up my thinking.
Steve Dennis, Sageberry Consulting, and so much more. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Shelf.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode of Beyond the Shelf. If you enjoy the show, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. It really helps us grow. And feel free to share us with your colleagues so they too can hear weekly perspectives from the brightest minds in e-commerce. You can also check us out on LinkedIn, where we post clips from each episode, share Dave's takes on breaking industry news, and much more. Beyond the Shelf is a production of It's Rapid. Our host is Dave Feinlieb, and our producer is Jake Musiker. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.